It's January and there is a winter storm warning, which is not usually a big deal to have a winter storm warning in January, but we are in Florida and it has been 11 years since there has been a winter storm warning. And so what I wanted to do is explore snowstorms in Florida and understand how the cold works a little bit better. So I figured we'd dive a little deeper into that information. So the forecast is calling for 3 to 4 inches of snow and ice in the panhandle. However, if you're in basically central Florida and south of there, you're not going to be in any of the wintry mix that is forecasted to come up. And it usually seems to be the case that northern Florida is as far south as weather goes. When I say weather, I mean snow. However, went back into the archive and I started to do some research around this. And would you believe that actually there was snow that fell in Miami in 1977. It was on January 19th of 1977 to be exact. And it was a light dusting, but it is the first time in history, in recorded history, that there was ever snow that fell in Miami. Now, interestingly, I was at a charity event over this past weekend and I ended up speaking with a gentleman who grew up in Fort Myers. I believe he's in his 70s at this stage. And he said, it never gets cold in Southwest Florida anymore. And I was like, well, that's surprising because a lot of people complain when it gets below 50 degrees, which happens a few times a year. But he said, no, when I was a kid, it got cold and it got below freezing fairly often. And I remember a time in I think he said 66, when it snowed and when he was a kid. But I can't find any records of that. I can't find any records of snow actually falling in Southwest Florida unless you go back all the way to 1899. There was a snowstorm that went between Fort Myers and Fort Pierce. And literally that's the last time that is recorded that shows anything about snow falling in Southwest Florida. So why is there such a discrepancy between northern Florida and southern Florida? Well, obviously you're getting closer to the equator as you move farther south, but there's some other factors that are at play here. And this is why so many people choose to live in southern Florida, whether that's East Coast or West Coast, compared to living in northern Florida. Now, when it comes to the differentiation in weather, the jet stream rarely comes as far south as Florida, but when it does, it just touches northern Florida. It does not typically dip down to get as far south as we are here in Southwest Florida. So that's one factor. But there's another factor that's at play, and that is the Gulf of Mexico. That generally is a warmer body of water, which we have figured out through different hurricanes, but that helps keep the warm air in the southern part of Florida. So that warm air that comes off of the Gulf of Mexico keeps the southern portion of Florida a much warmer and subtropic climate so that you don't experience the freezing cold that happens in the winter months. And so generally speaking, where does that happen? There is a line that is right around Sarasota, and anything south of Sarasota is a more moderate winter. And so yes, we will occasionally get down into the 40s, sometimes a high 30s as a low, but in general, if we're looking at the average temperature in Naples, January is the coldest month with an average high of 73 degrees and an average low of 60 degrees. So you can see that's very moderate, and compared to what the rest of the United States experiences, when it gets cold in Florida, it is always going to be significantly colder up north. I was actually speaking with a friend yesterday. He's in Wisconsin. That's where he lives. That's where he works. And he was talking about it's actually going to be 90 degrees difference between where he is in Wisconsin and where I am here in Southwest Florida, which is substantial. And now we can start to understand why people choose South Florida because of the difference in the temperatures. And this is why we have real snowbirds, the birds that actually migrate, but we also have the human snowbirds that actually come down to Southwest Florida. And that's why we have better than 50% of our population is transient. They come here for the winters, they leave and they go home for the summers, and they get to enjoy the best weather that Florida has to offer. Now, one other thing that I do want to touch on, I have lived in Florida for almost 19 years at this stage, and I have to admit admit that it is true that you become weak around low temperatures when you live in Florida. And so something around, I took a picture the other night. My wife was at one of the kids' soccer practice, and she had on a full hat, big puffy jacket, and I looked at the temperature and it was like 61 degrees and she was still cold. Now, all of our friends up north laugh at how we act, but I don't know, there's some kind of a reason why the blood thins out over time, but it becomes more challenging to deal with the cold when that comes. So be prepared that when you move to Florida, you may not be able to sustain or deal with the colder temperatures when your body is not used to getting that cold. Now, for those of you who do live in Florida and experience this phenomenon, there is some science that also backs this up. And part of what goes on there is that the humidity levels are typically a little higher in Southwest Florida, even in the winter months, compared to what people experience in the northern states. And so with a higher humidity, it's actually much harder for the body heat to escape. And so therefore you feel colder. And then when there's humidity in the summer, you actually feel warmer. So humidity makes us feel the temperatures in more extreme cold or more extreme heat. Also, the homes in Southwest Florida are not particularly designed for cold weather. They're designed to keep the heat out, not necessarily keep the heat in. And also on top of that, we do have heaters, but it's just forced air over an electrical heating component. And so it's not a very efficient heat, and it's not very powerful. So in the rare circumstance where you need heat in the house, it's just not that powerful. But what I can tell you is that maybe 1 or 2 times a year the heat kicks on. You always smell a little bit of burning in the air because of the dust that has accumulated on the coils for the rest of the year, because we just don't use the heat very often. So now we know a little bit more about how rare it is to snow, especially here in Southwest Florida. And if you're tired of the cold, you're tired of the snow up north, it would be worth reaching out to me and my team to explore what options are available for you here in Southwest Florida. We have a good amount of inventory available, and you as a potential buyer are able to negotiate significantly better than you would have been able to do in the last 5 years. And so it's starting to look like some really good opportunities out there. And that's all for now. Make it a blessed day. Thank you so much for watching.